Discord is a big, important part of the Splatoon community and gaming culture in general, and it's become customary for competitive teams and content creators to all have their own individual servers, not to mention servers with resources supporting the broader community and whatever else. Having been in charge of one that's on the larger side, and also having been a teacher and learned some behavior management techniques there, I've learned a lot about how these servers should work that I don't see being put into practice elsewhere. At a recent meeting with my moderators, one of them mentioned offhand that one of the rules of my server is one they would like other servers to pick up. And since I had a few other ideas to add to that, I've put together a short list of tips for building and moderating Discord servers. Quick disclaimer, the timing of this video is awkward because I just made a video yesterday addressing hate raids in Ken Knows' Discord server, and now I'm doing a lesson about Discord moderation, but I promise the two aren't related. I'm not throwing any shade about how that situation was handled or anything. I have no idea how it was handled. I learned about that from Twitter, not from being in the Discord server. I just happened to have that mod meeting right around the same time, so wanted to clear that up. Anyway, a lot of people underestimate the importance of good moderation on Discord, in part because they've only been in places that were well moderated and haven't seen just how bad it can get on the internet. People joke about Discord moderators, creating a stereotype of a basement dweller control freak who abuses the authority granted over the server to selfishly pursue short-sighted goals, like hitting on people or silencing people who disagree with them. While these kinds of people certainly do exist, unfortunately, it's also important to remember that doing the job well requires a lot of maturity, strong language skills, experience with how that community interacts, and a not insignificant time commitment. If someone paid me to do this exact job, one which is pretty exclusively done by volunteers in the community, I would want more than minimum wage for it, and it's a source of constant discomfort for me that I have no way to pay the mods in the Squid School Discord server for what they currently do for free. To really understand the value of moderation, I think that at some point you need to see what happens when it goes wrong. For one thing, I was a first-year teacher and my behavior management was not where it needed to be, so I've seen how a room full of students slowly shifts toward misbehavior that they didn't exhibit with other teachers. I learned verbal cues and common backtalk that I was later able to recognize as harmful more quickly the next time I saw it. But for another, I was in a gaming community during Gamergate and saw bad faith political actors worm their way in to promote harassment behaviors toward prominent women in the Smash community. I watched as what was briefly one of the funniest Facebook groups on the platform started to aim its less and less funny jokes at specifically feminist targets with uncomfortable consistency and more ambiguous levels of irony. It wasn't just that I saw the end product of hateful harassment, I also saw what caused the transformation, the degradation of users' original ideologies into an indecipherable soup of Poe's Law level, ostensible irony. The plausible deniability that they got from pressuring everyone into creating a space where nothing was serious or sacred allowed for ideologies that would never survive out in the open to propagate through subtext and dog whistles. The shift from ironic hate speech to sincere hate speech happened slowly enough that it felt natural, and like the ideology occurred organically, when actually it was the result of careful, manipulative social reprogramming. Not every space will descend into evil if left unchecked. Not every Discord mod is going to have to confront bad actors that are quite that bad or quite that organized. But no matter where rock bottom ends up being for that group of people, it's far easier to prevent the server from ever dipping below the surface of the water in the first place than it is to lift a shipwreck up out of the water after the worst happens. Maybe you never get targeted for recruitment by bigots, but you can still learn to identify whatever problem behaviors your community does tend to suffer from, and start learning the early warning signs of those. And the larger your server becomes, the more likely that large number of, statistically speaking, young adults and teenagers, old enough to understand bigger words but young enough and inexperienced enough to be impressionable, becomes an attractive target, not just to immature trolls or people who aren't in control of their emotions, but to those more insidious forces with political intentions. So learn to spot users that are creating rip currents toward chaos. If you develop an eye for someone behaving in a destructive way, you can nip these situations in the bud early so they're not even around long enough for people to talk about them when they're gone. The rule my moderator commented on, the inspiration to make this video, was something that developed out of my experience working with kids. One day, my class was taking a test, so the room was to be silent. When someone sneezes in that situation, it would be normal and acceptable behavior to say bless you. But one student took that and ran with it. They stood up on top of their chair, turned to the individual who sneezed, and said, "God bless you, sir," while making the hand gestures of a formal benediction, like one might see a priest perform. If the teacher attempts to correct the behavior, the student will argue that they were just saying bless you when someone sneezed, and you'd better believe that's all they're telling their parents about if word of the disruption of the classroom reaches them. They're thinly disguising the fact that they're just being disruptive to the classroom on purpose to rebel against the teacher or make their classmates laugh by pretending they're following an acceptable social script. The classroom rule that arises to prevent this kind of situation is something I word as follows. Don't expect me to take you seriously if you're not taking yourself seriously. The student was looking back at their buddies and giggling right up until the point their behavior was challenged, but then the face was immediately very serious and offended and indignant that I would interrupt such a reasonable interaction between them and their fellow student. This is the root of what we call acting in bad faith. It's creating a pretense, a social script. You create an expectation that others around you follow, but only pretending to hold up your end of that agreement, while actually acting for different reasons. This covers a similar issue common on the internet, where someone will watch another person's behavior and find it to be funny. They'll engage with this individual in a tone of voice and a choice of words their buddies will recognize as disingenuous, but that the individual is expected to take at face value. In the interaction, they'll do what they can to goad the target into exhibiting more of the behavior the jokers find funny, pushing whatever buttons they think they can push to get the person to keep going. Some online relationships develop like this over long spans of time. Especially in the early days of YouTube and live streaming, it was common for some people to make entire careers out of being goaded into behavior their audiences found funny in this way. There's a term to describe them, lolcows. Simply set a rule in your server against acting in bad faith. Don't let people expect others to take them seriously when they're laughing about it with their buddies behind their backs. It becomes easier to spot the more you look for it, and you can find examples to show your mods, and it preemptively cleans up a lot of situations that could otherwise have gotten toxic. Most servers stay fairly small and can be moderated really easily. But as more people join, the need for a more robust system of moderation increases. When a team server becomes a popular place to ping for scrims and there are a bunch of teams in there, or a content creator goes viral and their server member count starts rising at the rate of their view counts, it's important as the manager of that server to recognize that moderation needs to scale up as the member count scales up. If you're moderating the server or you've got a few dedicated mods, and you're starting to get tired and burn out from the increasing workload, make sure you're recognizing that and getting the extra help you need to make it sustainable. My last recommendation is about a somewhat common practice that I've seen of including a separate channel in the server for venting or salt posting. The idea of these channels is to have a garbage dump for expressions of negativity that people don't want to see elsewhere in the server. If those only get posted in the venting channel, people figure, nobody ever has to see them because they can just avoid that one channel. There are critical flaws to this idea, though. For one thing, you can't just segment space in an online community to be a garbage dump. The garbage always leaks into the other segments. People aren't just compartmentalizing all their negative emotions in the one channel when they use it. Their perspectives are being warped by habitually entering spaces that are toxic to stay in for too long. and they bring those perspectives and emotional states back with them, even into spaces that are supposed to be cleaner and more positive. This is why I try not to talk about someone I need to maintain a positive relationship with behind their back. Even though they can't hear me in that moment, having said what I said colors my perspective of that person, and I eventually catch myself treating them differently on the basis of what I've been saying. Another major failure of this idea is that many people just don't understand what venting really is. Having studied psychology in college, I came across this exact term in textbooks and got some professors' takes on it. In short, venting is much more about the response of the listener than people understand. The speaker can still speak their mind and address what's making them feel negatively, but for venting to be effective, the listener has to consent to step into that role and acknowledge what's being said in an empathetic way. Done well, it looks much more like confiding in a friend than shouting your problems in public. It should be done with someone who you trust to provide a helpful perspective, not just anyone with a pulse who will listen. It shouldn't be something you do all the time, because on top of tiring out the person listening with negative emotions, for which no one has infinite energy to process, you also might just end up practicing the negative emotion. Repeating those neural pathways over again, instead of using the venting as a means of reaching a happier equilibrium, may feel good in the moment, but actually worsen your mental health. Creating a channel in a moderately sized public Discord server for venting is like designing a church confessional booth that, instead of giving you one-on-one time with a priest, blasts what you're saying out a megaphone in front of the church for whoever happens to be walking by to hear. For one thing, the negativity of it affects everyone, including people who never agreed to be vented to by that particular person. Maybe they're willing to listen to their friend, but not someone else. For another, it makes it way less likely that there will be a listener at all. And even if there is a listener, there's no guarantee they'll know the person, have the level of emotional intelligence the speaker wants, give any advice at all, or even act in good faith with the information being shared. It also anonymizes the listeners. Now the person venting will feel like they can just launch all their problems into some void in the internet, rather than understanding that sharing with this friend of theirs is placing a burden on that friend. Real venting can show that the listener is willing to help their friend, while also making the speaker appreciate the friendship enough that they only decide to ask to vent when they feel it would really be helpful for them. Venting has no place in a public server. Just don't include a channel for this behavior, and in fact, write a rule banning this kind of sustained expression of negative emotions in the public parts of your server altogether. The public spaces are not the places for that. Individual conversations like you could have in DMs are. If it's just a server with a bunch of your friends and every single one of you is always willing to be emotionally available to your venting every time you enter the server, that could be a healthy arrangement. But the venting still shouldn't be happening so frequently that it's burning you all out. If the server gets any less private and intimate than that, you really should be specifically asking individual people if it's okay to vent to them. And instead of holding that conversation in the server where everyone can see it, just move it to DMs, where you can have more of that personal connection with them. Venting or salt posting channels just create more regular salt posters. Their idea of venting behavior doesn't lead to them becoming less negative or resolving any of their problems. If someone chooses to break this rule and vents in my server, they absolutely can get banned for that, because it represents an unwillingness to control their emotions for the health and well-being of those around them. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into running a Discord server than just these few ideas, but these are some changes that I think would make for much better atmospheres in a lot of the servers I've seen. So I would humbly ask that you consider implementing them in yours. Moderating these spaces is no less than a community safety issue, and it's worth taking very seriously. Be good to each other, and thanks for watching all the way through. I know this was a long one.